A lone cowboy stumbles upon a disheveled girl hanging from a tree. A sign above her reading, "White men do not forgive." Under the scorching New Mexico sun, the solitary cowboy, Basil Wyatt, rode his gray mare at a leisurely pace, the dust kicking up behind every footstep. He had spent half the day tracking the faint hoofprints of a lost calf across the cracked earth. The silence was broken only by the creak of the saddle, the whistle of the wind, and the cry of a hawk. Basil liked the stillness. It was lonely, peaceful, and predictable. Then, a strange sound broke through, so faint he almost mistook it for the wind. A choked sob, like a breath that had forgotten how to breathe. Basil froze in the saddle, his head tilted, his heart slowing. Again the frail sound rose, sharp as a thread about to snap. Basil dismounted quickly, tying the reins to a dried juniper branch. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, pushing through the thorny bushes and jagged rocks. And there, under the oldest tree, he saw her. She was suspended from the gnarled trunk, her wrists bound tightly. The girl's body was limp like a broken doll, her feet barely touching the ground. Her sun-beaten skin was caked in dirt, her long black hair matted with blood. Her chest still rose and fell, a faint, ragged sign of life. Basil's eyes were immediately drawn to the crude wooden plank nailed to the tree trunk directly above her. The words, scrawled in red paint, were stark and angry. "White men do not forgive." He instinctively took a step back, a wave of nausea rising within him. The air grew heavy, thick with a sense of dread. It was a warning, a message, a curse. Basil's gaze darted around, scanning every rock and ridge, but he saw no one, only the wind whispering through the dry leaves. His hand rested lightly on the handle of his dagger. "Lord," he murmured, "what have they done to you?" The girl stirred. Her head sagged forward, and he saw the deep, bleeding burns on her wrist from the rope. He swallowed hard. "Hold on now, little one," Basil whispered. "You're alive, can you hear me?" Basil lowered his voice almost to himself. "I'm not here to hurt you." His boots shuffled closer. He could see her face clearly now, so young, maybe only 18, with a high forehead, a strong jaw, and cheeks hollowed out from thirst. Dry blood caked her lips. He reached out and touched the rope, braided from mesquite fibers, rough and old. Whoever did this wanted her to suffer, not just to hang. He drew his knife, but his hand trembled. The sign screamed at him, echoing with a guilt he didn't share. It made him hesitate. But when she groaned again, his hesitation vanished. "I'm not like them," he muttered, the blade sliding onto the rope. With a single decisive cut, the rope snapped. She fell forward, and he caught her just in time. Her body was warm, even feverish and light in his arms, as if she had no bones. Her eyes flickered open, dark, terrified, and unfocused. Basil gently helped her to the ground, kneeling on one knee in the dirt. He poured water from his canteen onto a cloth and dabbed it on her cracked lips. "Take it easy," he said. "You're safe, at least for now." She blinked twice, still not speaking, but her weak hand clutched his sleeve. He looked at the sign one last time, then back at her. Her heavy eyelids moved, revealing a flash of dark eyes. But instead of seeing him, her gaze seemed to look right through him, hazy and lost. Basil fumbled in his saddlebag and pulled out his canteen. He trickled drops of water onto her lips, waiting patiently for her body to react. A soft swallow, weak but enough for him to breathe a sigh of relief. He then took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Do you have a name?" he asked softly. There was no reply. "Well, then we'll find you one, won't we?" he mumbled. He stood up, lifting her into his arms, holding her like something not yet completely broken. "But for now, you're with me." And with that, Basil Wyatt turned his back on the wilderness, carrying a girl marked for death and a secret heavy enough to get a man hanged. When her trembling hands gently gripped his, Basil knew she still had hope, but at the same time, a cold feeling ran down his spine. The red words on the sign still burned in his eyes. "White men do not forgive." This was not a random act of cruelty. This was a symbol, a declaration of war. and he, just by happening to pass by, had now become an unwilling witness to a blood feud poised to consume them all. The sun had already vanished behind the hills when Basil returned to the ranch. It was a humble outpost perched on the edge of the desert, a land too unforgiving for people to forget violence. The wind made the old windmill creak, and the wobbly horse stall groaned as if in protest. The house was a single room, with a loft patched with old metal sheets, but it stood strong, as resilient and honest as the man who built it. Basil helped the girl down from his mare and brought her inside. She was running a fever, her head resting against his chest, her breath as faint as dry leaves rustling on the stone floor. He gently laid her on the cot, carefully opening his jacket so as not to alarm her. Her eyes briefly fluttered open, dark, wide, and distant, but still watching him. The lantern light flickered on the wall as he poured water into a metal basin and placed it by her feet. He took a clean cloth from the shelf and knelt down. Her legs were bruised and scratched, one ankle was swollen, and the rope burns on her wrists were deep, raw wounds. "I won't hurt you," he said, just to break the silence. "Just gonna clean you up a bit." He dipped the cloth into the warm water, wrung it out, and then slowly and carefully took her right foot and placed it in the basin. She flinched slightly, and he immediately stopped. When she didn't pull her foot away, he began to gently clean the dirt and blood, his movements precise, as if he were touching something sacred. The water in the basin turned red and brown. He worked in silence, careful not to look into her eyes for too long, though he felt their gaze, sharp as a half-drawn blade, unsure whether to stab or surrender. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but no sound came out. "You don't talk much, do you?" he muttered, without malice. "That's all right. Silence is better than most things these days." He finished with the first foot, then the other. She let him work without resistance. When he was done, he wrapped her feet in soft strips of cloth and gently placed them on a folded blanket. "You remind me of a river," he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. "It stays dry for most of the year. Looks like it's dead. But after the rains, the water flows fast and deep. Folks around there call it the Silent Serpent." Basil looked at her, her face clear in the flickering lantern light. Her cheekbones were as sharp as a ridgeline, her lips full but cracked, her dark eyelashes caked with sand. She was too young for such tragedy. Yet, in her eyes, he saw a world weariness that wasn't afraid of pain, but only waiting for it to end. "I'll call you Lena," he said softly. "Just for now. You look like an Elena, silent but strong." The girl blinked once, slowly, offering no protest, only a faint breath. Basil stood up, his hands still damp, and reached for a blanket. He gently draped it over her shoulders and stepped back. "If you get hungry, there are beans," he said. "Not much, but better than nothing." Still no answer. He took his bedroll and pulled it toward the door. Tonight, he would sleep in the horse stall to give her space. It wasn't right for her to be watched over by a stranger, especially one with a past full of blood and questions in his eyes. Before he stepped out, he took one last look. She had shifted slightly, her eyes closed, her lips no longer trembling. The basin was still by the bed, stained with the residue of what had happened to her. He picked it up, emptied it outside, and watched the water soak into the parched ground. Inside, she dreamed of fire, of horses, of ropes cutting through the sky, and of rough but gentle hands, washing away her pain without asking for a thing in return. The following days passed slowly to the rhythm of the desert, but the silence in the house was now different, heavier, filled with a certain tension. Lena, as Basil still called her, ate very little. She moved cautiously, her eyes always on guard, her body tense like a trapped animal. She never spoke, yet he often caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. At night, Basil gave her the bed and slept in the horse stall, his rifle always by his side. He pretended it was to give her space, but the truth was more complicated. He was afraid, not of her, but of the meaning of her presence. The sign on the tree still haunted his mind. "White men do not forgive." The person who wrote it wanted her to die a slow death. And they, those people, might still be on their way. 3 mornings later, Basil found a boot print for the first time. It was smaller than his, fresher than his, and led straight to the horse stall. He knelt down, examining the boot heel on the hard ground. It was a cavalryman's boot. The print was fresh, no more than a few hours old. He slowly stood up, his eyes sweeping across the ridge, seeing only sagebrush and shimmering heat. Back inside, Lena was still by the window, motionless and silent. She didn't look at him when he entered, but her body was tense. "Did you see anyone?" he asked. She didn't speak, just tightened the blanket around her shoulders. "I think we have company," Basil mumbled, almost to himself. That night, he put the lantern down and sat on the porch, his rifle resting on his knees. The wind had died down, a coyote howled in the distance, and the stars flickered to life like awakening ghosts. Lena wasn't sleeping. He could hear her pacing slowly inside. Sometime around noon the next day, a rider arrived. Dust swirled behind a chestnut horse as it approached. The rider wore the blue and gold uniform of a U.S. plant cavalryman, a rifle in its scabbard, his hat pulled low, shadowing a jagged chin. Basil stepped off the porch, one hand resting lightly on his belt. The soldier reined in his horse and squinted down. "You, Wyatt?" "Depends who's asking," he replied. "Lieutenant Graham, Dust Hollow Station. We're tracking a fugitive." The soldier pulled a wanted poster from his breast pocket and held it out. Basil took it, already knowing what it would show. It was a crude sketch of a young Apache girl, with sharp eyes and long hair, and the words, "Wanted for murder and escape. Dangerous. $50 reward." Basil slowly raised his head. "Can't say that I have." "You sure about that?" The soldier leaned in, his voice thick with suspicion. "We're looking for a small, quiet girl, might be injured. Probably picked up or taken away by somebody passing through Cottonwood Flats." Basil held the paper for a few more seconds, then folded it and handed it back to him. "Haven't seen anyone. Just a jackrabbit and a lost steer." Lieutenant Graham narrowed his eyes. "She ain't just a fugitive, Wyatt. She's part of a violent bunch, savages. The sign they left, they mean it." Basil's jaw tightened. "If I see anything, I'll let you know." The soldier watched him for a moment longer, then nodded and turned his horse around. "You do that." Basil watched the soldier ride off until the dust had settled. Inside, Lena stood hidden behind the curtain, motionless, having heard every word. She stared at him. Basil came inside, took off his hat, and leaned against the door. "They're looking for you. Got a wanted poster and all." She said nothing. "I told him I hadn't seen a thing." Her eyes narrowed, confused, full of doubt. "I don't know what you did, Lena. Maybe one day you'll tell me. But out here, a man's got to make a choice, and I made mine." He turned back to the stove, pretending to stir a pre-cooked pot of beans. Behind him, she shifted slightly, a small breath, and in that moment, trust broke the silence, just for a little while. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard as the wind died down. It was an odd day, too quiet, as if the desert were holding its breath. Basil sat on the porch, sharpening his knife with slow, steady strokes. The rasp of metal on stone echoed across the empty yard. He focused on the motion, as if the repetition could keep his thoughts from straying too far to the woman sleeping or waking inside. He stopped, tilting his head. There was a faint sound of footsteps on gravel. Not a coyote, not a horse, but something lighter, human. He looked up. Lena was outside. It was the first time she had crossed the threshold on her own since he had brought her back. Her bare feet touched the ground tentatively, as if testing if the earth would still hold her. The blanket he had left on the bed was draped over her shoulders, hanging like a second skin. She walked slowly, unsteadily but surely toward the end of the yard, where the horse stall stood. Basil put the knife down, not moving at first. He watched her, unwilling to break the moment. In the fading light, she looked smaller and more fragile, but the way she moved had changed. She wasn't fleeing, she was reclaiming what she had lost. She came to a cleared patch of ground beside the stall where the wind had swept everything clean. There, she carefully knelt as if before something sacred, letting the blanket fall. Her fingers moved with purpose as she picked up a twig and began to draw in the dust. Only then did Basil rise, approaching slowly, his boots soft on the ground so as not to disturb her. He stood a few feet away, watching her hands work. On the ground, she had drawn a bird. Its wings were spread mid-flight, but fire surrounded it like a blazing crown. The lines were bold and sharp, etched with intense concentration. The bird looked both alive and in agony, its wings reaching upward, as if trying to escape the flames or ascend with them. Basil had seen war, seen symbols etched into rifles and tattooed onto skin. But this drawing, this was something more ancient. A cry, a prayer. Basil crouched beside her, his voice low and respectful. "What is this?" Lena didn't look up, her eyes still fixed on the drawing. After a long moment, as if deciding whether to release the memory, she spoke. "Bird in the fire." Her voice was dry, cracked like a riverbed. "My tribe's symbol." Basil silently looked at the drawing. She tapped the center of the bird with the twig. "This is my family's symbol. We always painted it on our lodges, carved it into trees. This bird always flies, and it is always in flames." Basil could feel the tension in her body. Her shoulders were pulled back, her jaw clenched. She was bracing herself to face something. She hesitated to tell her story. "They came. Soldiers, men in white coats, last spring. They told us we had to leave, go to a far-off dry land where there was no food or water. They said we were a danger." She paused, the twig trembling in her hand. "We didn't agree. We wanted to stay, to fight." Her voice choked. "They burned everything. My mother was killed. My 2 brothers and the elders were burned alive right inside our lodges." Basil's jaw tightened. An old rage stirred in his chest. "I ran. I hid. But they found me, they beat me, tied me up and called me a thief. They said I took a rifle, but I didn't." She turned, looking him in the eye for the first time, her voice filled with anger. "I didn't steal. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't do anything wrong." Her voice echoed across the dry land like thunder. Basil was silent for a moment. Then his voice came, low but firm. "I believe you." She turned back to the ground, dropping the twig, her hand falling limp. Then her shoulders began to shake. At first there was no sound, just silent tremors, and then a sob escaped, raw and unrestrained. She curled up, her arms around her knees, her hair falling like a curtain. The pain pouring out was too big for her body. Basil stayed beside her, motionless. He didn't reach out, didn't try to comfort her with empty words. Instead, he pressed the palm of his hand into the dirt beside the flaming bird, his fingers splayed, his skin touching the spot where she had shaped her pain. It wasn't a touch, it was a witness. She felt it. Finally, her breathing slowed. She raised her head, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Their eyes met without a pretense. "You can call me Lena," she whispered. Basil nodded slightly, his voice firm. "All right, Lena it is." They sat together in silence as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The fire on the ground faded into darkness, but the ashes that remained, like the truth, endured. That night, the wind whispered gently through the eaves, rustling through the thin walls like a ghost searching for its name. Basil sat by the fire, his boots off, his sleeves rolled up, tending to a pot of beans. Lena stood by the window, her arms crossed, watching the night fall over the desert. The silence between them was softer now, like a shared breath. Suddenly, she turned. "Do you want to know the truth?" Basil looked up, the spoon still in his hand, and gave a small nod, careful not to pressure her with words. She walked slowly to the table, sitting across from him. Her voice was low but clear. She began, "My father was a small chief. Our tribe was peaceful. We traded with settlers and even learned their beliefs. We had our own rules and boundaries. All we wanted was to live in peace." Basil listened, his face unreadable but intensely focused. "One winter ago," she continued, "a white woman was killed near our hunting grounds. Her husband said it was us, but it wasn't. Her own husband killed her, but they blamed us." Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. Not just the soldiers, but the homesteaders came too. Men from the town with guns and fear, saying they came to deliver justice. She swallowed, a knot of pain in her throat. They burned our camps, shot my brothers as they slept. My mother died clutching the rosary a priest had given her. They hanged my father on our tribe's council pole. Basil lowered his gaze. They found me hiding in a hollow tree. I had a knife, but they took it. They said I was planning revenge, that I was dangerous. They tied me up, interrogated me, and beat me. Then, they took me to the tree where you found me, and hanged me there as a lure. To lure who? Basil asked, his voice hoarse. They wanted to lure the survivors of my tribe, she answered, her eyes full of fury. Then, her voice became small, bewildered. So why did you save me? Basil looked at her, the fire flickering between them. Because I used to be just like you, he said, his voice raspy. She frowned, not understanding. My family, Basil continued, his voice even. Last spring, a gang of bandits attacked our ranch. They said they were Apache. Maybe they were, maybe not. I was out hunting. When I came back, all that was left was ash. My sister was only 16. I heard her crying in the horse stall, but I was too afraid to go in. I waited for someone to help, but she died before anyone came. The silence that followed was different, no longer empty, but heavy. You saved me because you couldn't save your sister, Lena whispered. He nodded. She looked him straight in the eyes and asked softly, if I was white, would you have cut that rope? Basil slowly stood up, walking around the table to stand in front of her. She looked up at him, searching his face for the answer. He knelt down and gently lifted her chin. His hands were calloused, but his touch was incredibly careful. I didn't save you because you were white or Indian. I saved you because you were a human being in need of help. Her eyes welled up, but no tears fell. She took his hand and pressed his palm to her cheek. Then instinctively they leaned toward each other. The kiss was gentle, hesitant at first, and then deeper, as if they had both been holding their breath for too long and had finally remembered how to breathe. Her hands trembled on his chest, and his arms wrapped around her back. The fire crackled softly behind them. In the small kitchen, the candlelight flickered on the old wood, their shadows on the wall becoming one, creating a slow dance they had never learned but understood. Outside, the desert wind was still for the first time in days. Inside, something began to heal. The wind returned in the morning, stronger than ever, carrying the scent of sand and distant smoke. Basil felt it in his bones. Something was changing. He had lived long enough in this land to feel the heaviness before a storm, even when it arrived on boots instead of clouds. 3 days had passed since that kiss, since those quiet words had begun to take root. Lena had moved more freely around the ranch. She helped him feed the livestock, swept the floors, and even let out a small laugh once when Basil cursed his stubborn mule, but the peace was fragile. At midday, a plume of dust rose from the east. Basil stood by the fence, his jaw clenched, his rifle leaning against the porch. 3 riders approached, local men in denim coats, worn hats, with rifles slung on their backs. The one in front wore a self-appointed tin badge on his chest. Wyatt, the man called out as he dismounted. Heard you're harboring someone who don't belong here. Basil kept his voice even. Joe, you believe everything you hear. Rumors are a dime a dozen, but the truth is different. Joe Prescott spat on the ground. A girl. Apache. There's a bounty on her. $50. And the gratitude of all God-fearing folk west of Pecos. You came all this way for a rumor? Prescott squinted. We want to take a look inside, just in case she's in there. Basil stepped off the porch, his question a challenge. You got a warrant? Prescott snickered. You think this is a courthouse, Wyatt? The 2 men with him tensed in their saddles, their hands near their guns. The air grew taut. It's just me out here, Basil said, his voice calm. No girl, just ghosts and goats. Prescott stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. If you're lying, you'll pay the price. They left without searching, but the message was clear. They would be back, in greater numbers and with more aggression. That night, Basil sat by a fire behind the horse stall, the stars obscured by heavy clouds. In his hands was the crude wooden sign he had retrieved from its hiding place. The sign was faded, but the hateful words were still legible. "White men do not forgive." He stared at it, his fingers tracing each letter. Then he stood, carrying it to the fire pit. There was no ceremony, no words. He laid it in the middle of the kindling and struck a match. The fire slowly took hold, consuming the words in shades of orange and yellow. The wood cracked and curled inward, as if the hatred itself was resisting its demise. Behind him, there was a sound of footsteps. It was Lena. She was wearing one of his old coats. It was too big for her, the sleeves rolled up twice. She came to his side, her eyes on the fire, saying nothing, but her presence said everything. The flames danced in her eyes, reflecting something like mourning and something like freedom. "I should have burned it sooner," Basil said softly. She didn't respond, but she moved closer, just enough for their shoulders to touch. She gripped the coat around her, her fingers clenching the fabric. "Thank you," she said softly. The words were simple but sacred. He looked down at her, his heart both heavy and alive. The fire died down, leaving only embers. Above them the wind quieted to a low hum, and for the first time since he had saved her, he felt a sense of relief. There was no longer any physical sign of what had been written against her. Only the heat, the smoke, and the weight of what they had chosen to replace it with. The next morning there was no wind, only a thick, unnatural stillness. Basil woke early, packing dry biscuits, jerky, and a canteen of water into his saddlebags. The air around the ranch was tight, as if they were being watched. He had seen smoke on the horizon, too steady to be a campfire. Word had spread. Their time had run out. Lena stood by the fence, her hair in a neat braid, wearing the coat she had on the night before. Her face was calm, but her eyes were full of questions. "We have to go," Basil said, tying the final knot on the saddlebags. "Tonight," she nodded, as if she had already known. "There's land south of here," he said. "It's past the border. Some say the Apache still live free in the Sierra Madres, away from soldiers and wanted posters. If we ride hard, we'll be safe there." Lena stepped closer, so near that he could see the flush on her cheeks. She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. He looked down at her, his voice a whisper. "Will you come with me?" She pressed her forehead against his chest, her warm breath seeping through his shirt. Then she answered, her voice hesitant and slow, "I want to live. I want to live as your wife." Basil closed his eyes. The words were heavier than 1,000 promises. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair as if it were the last thing holding him to the ground. When the sun set, they were ready. The horses were saddled, the ranch left behind. There was no note, no fire, no farewell. Just a quiet door swinging, and a house that had become a memory. They rode through the desert under the stars, the moonlight casting silver on the ridges. Lena leaned forward on her horse, her movements steady and skilled. She didn't ask what lay ahead. She just followed. 10 miles from the border, the land opened up into low scrub and rock faces. Basil's eyes constantly swept the horizon, every shadow a potential threat. His stomach was a tight knot. Then, a rifle shot rang out, a sharp crack that echoed across the flatlands. Basil lurched in the saddle and fell sideways, hitting the dirt with a thud. "Basil!" Lena cried, leaping off her horse. He clutched his side, blood already seeping through his shirt. "Go. Just go," he rasped. Another shot whizzed past them, embedding itself in the rock behind. From the ridge, 2 figures appeared, riders, their rifles raised. Basil groaned, struggling to get to his feet. "We have to move." Lena slid her arm under his shoulder, trying to lift him. "Trust me," he grunted. "I'm not going." Through sheer force of will, they stumbled toward the rocks, bullets cutting through the night. Basil's boots dragged behind him, but he forced himself to walk. Each breath was wet, his vision blurring. Somehow, they reached a narrow opening between 2 rock faces, a hidden passage. Lena half pulled, half carried him inside, pressing him against the rock face, her chest heaving. The gunshots faded behind them. The riders wouldn't follow through the rocks, not without losing speed, not without risk. In the darkness of the passage, Basil sank to the ground, blood dripping into the dust. He looked up at her, pain and surprise in his eyes. "You said you wanted to be my wife?" She knelt beside him, holding his face in her hands. "I meant it." His lips curved, even in the pain. "Then we better get through this passage." She nodded, and for the first time since they had met, Lena prayed not to the gods of the settlers, but to the spirits of fire, wind, and survival, because love in this place was always a gamble, and tonight they were betting everything. The lodges rustled softly in the river breeze, moonlight seeping through the seams like silver threads. Outside, the crickets chirped and the water whispered over stones. Inside, Basil lay propped up on folded blankets, his breathing slow but steady. The fever had passed. The worst was over. Lena sat beside him, a basin of cool water by her side, gently dabbing his forehead. He looked at her through his half-lidded eyes, a small smile playing on his lips. "You always this bossy, nurse?" he mumbled. She raised an eyebrow but smiled. "Only with men too stubborn to die." He chuckled, then winced as the laugh stretched the stitches in his side. She shushed him and placed a palm on his chest to hold him still. The silence between them deepened, no longer awkward but full. Then, as the wind sighed outside, he spoke again. "Tell me something true," Basil said, his voice now softer. "What's your real name?" Lena looked down, hesitant. Then she reached for his hand and placed it on her chest, right over her heart. "Tahana," she said. "It means peaceful river. My father gave me that name." Basil closed his eyes for a moment, as if letting the name sink into him like a prayer. When he opened them, there was a warmth beneath the weariness. "Tahana," he repeated, tasting the word. "You're the only peace I've ever known." This time, she didn't cry. She just held his hand tighter. Months passed. At the southern edge of the territory, where the border blurred into mesquite thickets, and the dry wind carried the scent of sage and wood smoke, a small home nestled near a bend in the river. Built of pine and hide, it was sturdy yet humble, tucked away among rustling reeds and wildflowers. In the shade of the porch, Ayana Salvatierra sat cross-legged, sewing a small white shirt. Her belly was round, a soft curve visible beneath her tied shawl. She hummed a quiet tune, pulling the needle through the soft cotton, her fingers steady and calm. In the yard, Basil was training a young Mustang, murmuring small commands, patient and firm. He glanced toward the house occasionally, catching her silhouette through the bright curtain, and each time a small smile would form on his lips. Inside, the home held no trophies, no portraits, only bundles of herbs, 2 books, and a baby blanket awaiting completion. Ayana moved through it like the place's own breath, present, steady, and full of peaceful life. One evening, she walked down to the river, a path she had come to know well over the months. The water moved slow and steady. She stepped into the shallows with her bare feet, letting the cool water touch her skin, and rested both hands on her belly. "Little one," she whispered, "your father, he didn't just forgive, he loved, and he kept his promise to everyone." Behind her, footsteps sounded on the grass. He came to stand beside her, their fingers lacing together without a word. Together they watched the river flow beneath the sunset, where the stars were just beginning to flicker. No one would have expected 2 hunted souls to find something like this. But somehow, in a world full of scars and storms, they had created a quiet patch of land where love had taken root. Not the kind of love written in history books, but the kind that endures. And the river kept flowing, peaceful like her name, like their life, like a place that had finally, truly become home.